ragman's son, who was a student himself, but I started studying with him when I was 7.5 years old. And after school, when all the kids were playing ball, I was stuck with staying home, playing scales and things. And I remember my mother used to cry when I didn't practice. I found out when I was an adult that they were crocodile tears, that it was her ruse in making me practice. But it worked, because after a couple of years I started sounding good enough, and that got me over that hump, because everybody that starts on violin, they're excited, but they give up on it because it is a very difficult instrument. And if you can just persevere past that learning stage where your notes don't sound very good, if you can get past that and stick with it until you can draw one note that sounds beautiful, then all of a sudden it's that first step that gets you halfway there already.
Oh, really?
So I was lucky that my mother persevered and kept me playing until I got over that hump where I started sounding good, and then she didn't have to tell me anymore after that.
Can you remember the first song that you played that sounded good to you?
You want to know something? I do. And I played it at a picnic that my music teacher, his uncle had a riding academy on the south side, 119th and Morgan. And we had to go there on a horse and wagon. And I practiced with an accordion player who's now passed away, Vic Valinari. And we practiced for like a month to learn 2 or 3 songs. And I remember one distinctly was long, long ago. I don't know if you want me to play it?
Yes, please.
The way I play it now or the way I played it then?
Oh, if you could do both, that would be wonderful.
Long, long ago. I thought that was the most beautiful song, Now what would I do with it?
Yeah.
If I had a rhythm section?
Yes.
Oh. I can't play it without having to move back. I sound really better than that, kids. Okay.
Well, so that's what 80 years of playing does for you? It helps you go from the first to the last, huh?
Well, I was afraid of bumping the table and all that stuff.
We can pull the table out a little bit. Why
No,
don't we?
that's okay.
Or we can move back. Maybe, Tim, if you could pull the table
I'll
out a
just
little
move my
bit.
chair back. Is that okay?
That's perfectly fine. I just want to make sure for all of you out there that you can hear and see Johnny, and that's what we're making sure that we can do that, and that he has enough room to play as well. So just bear with us for a minute. Does anybody at Von Steuben have any comments about that song? No? Recognize that? We have any musicians out there? It's one of those songs that's pretty standard in any kind of basic music book, and that even pianists I know, and if you play the trumpet or something else, you'll get that. You'll have that song that you're playing. Johnny, I have a question to ask you though. You played other instruments. Do you feel that doing that has improved your playing, or has it affected your playing?
I'll tell you the most important thing. There are a lot of great violinists. In the symphony, they can just sight read a very difficult piece of classical music like they're reading a newspaper. But because they've studied so hard and so long, they're afraid to deviate from the melody, because God forbid if they're playing in an orchestra and everybody is playing down bow and they're playing up bow, that bow is going to stick out and the teacher's going to see that, and he could even lose his job if he was playing in a symphony, and he did that a couple of times, because then the teacher knows that he's not doing it the way it's on the music. But when violin players play jazz, or I should say when they try to play jazz, they don't know the chords necessarily, unless they can also play piano, and then they know where the bass note is, which is the root of the chord. See, all the chords start from the bass note. That's the bottom note, and the chord is built up from there, from the third, the fifth, and the seventh, and the ninth, and the. But because I played bass, when I got into high school, I switched to string bass, and because I played bass for many years with big orchestras, short while with Benny Goodman, Jimmy Dorsey's band for about a year and a half, Tommy Dorsey for a short time, I got to play all those bass notes. So subconsciously, those bass notes were programmed into my subconscious mind. So when I played a melody on a violin, I don't have time to consciously analyze what was that chord, but it's in my mind and I can hear the bass line. And so because of that bass line, I know what those chords are, because they all start from the bass line. So that's been a great help. So that's why I actually almost gave the violin up after high school, because I started getting all my jobs on string bass. And I made 90 or 95% of my living for the next half century playing bass. And all during that time, I played violin very sporadically. And it's only in the last 18 years that I gave up on the bass and really reconcentrated on my violin chops. We call them chops. Our technique, we call them my fiddle chops.
Well, now, why do you call it chops? What's that?
Marie,
Vernacular.
Marie, this is Lisa and
Yes,
Von Steuben.
yes,
I'm
Lisa.
going to break in and tell you that one of your sites is not muted and it keeps pulling away from him when he's talking.
Okay,
So perhaps you can make sure that they understand they have to mute.
okay, all right, thank you. Could we have the sites in Kenosha? If you could mute your sites if you're not going to be talking, that would be great. I appreciate that. What I'd like to do now is instead of exploring the music a little more, I'd like to go back to visual art. And one of the things that I think about when I'm watching TV or doing something like this, working on a computer, is that and watching a film, that's a marriage of both sound and something visual. And so today we have two artists, as I said, and we have Tim Schools here. And Tim does a kind of art. He's also self-taught. So in a way, his artwork it was reminiscent of Johnny's in that it's got this sort of flowing, sort of fluid style. And I'm going to just show one piece that Tim has done, and then we're going to have him talk about this piece. And Tim, let me put this one up on the document camera. And why don't you tell us a little bit about this piece, Tim, and who this lady is, if you know, and why you painted this, just something about this.
Well, I was very partial to historical scenes and history itself, and antiques. And this girl, I knew her since she was 2 years old, and I would use her often as a model, and I just put together a scene that kind of had an antique look to it. And basically, this is it. I didn't really, just a lot of times I come up with an idea, but then I imagine something in my mind, and then I go at it, but then I don't really know how I'm going to I kind of play my art by ear, like you would music. You know, I start painting, and then it starts going in a direction that I really hadn't considered.
I have a question to ask you, Tim, about this particular piece. I'm going to go back to it now. Did you paint this from memory, or did this person sit for this painting, or did you do it from a photograph?
This girl sat for me. I saw the chair. One of my friends owned the chair, and I sat up. This is my old studio. About 7 or 8, about 10 years ago, I did this painting. So I brought this chair up into my studio, put the painting painted on the wall behind her. I put that there, and then asked her to pose in this position.
Now, in looking at this, Tim, you have real energy, pretty energetic brush strokes in this painting. And some people would classify your art as naive art. What does that mean?
Well, naive art is, for instance, Van Gogh was considered a naive artist in his early stages. It's basically not being taught by anyone, not going to school or anything, and just having it like a child who may perhaps have crayons and paper and just going at it and painting scenes that, that like a Christmas scene or something, they'll paint a Christmas tree or an angel or something, but not looking at anything, but just coming up with their own idea of what they would perceive it as, and then that's known as naive artist, which is also along the same lines as today you may perhaps hear of outsider artists, which is basically the same. There's people down in Florida that find ketchup bottles, and they'll take ketchup bottles and paint on those, and then find a bone, from a turkey bone or something, and stick it inside the bottle and use that for a head, and paint a face on it, and may end up making a woman, like perhaps an old, corn, one of those old dolls or something that they used to make up,
Like a corncob doll.
Yeah, corncob doll or something. It's it's just coming up with an invention, of your own.
I have a question for you. Let's take a look at another painting of yours. And pardon the glare on this. Was this painting done from memory, or how did you come about doing this one?
This also, the girl in the last painting is the girl on the left in this painting. This is also just, the reason I painted this was they're all three sisters, and I knew them all so well since they were young, 4 and 5 years old, and I had seen their interaction with each other and the different things they had experienced together. I had seen them have slumber parties and stuff through the past years, and I had caught a glimpse of that and had thought that that it would make a nice painting. And eventually, I just paid the girls to sit for me and did the picture.
And this is, as you can see, that they're in their pajamas here. They have nightgowns on there, or it looks like for the slumber party. I have a question to ask both Johnny and Tim. Another connection between your two art is both of you are interested in black culture, and it's reflected in your artwork. I mean, jazz is connected with black culture, and so is, and your paintings are portraits, even though you say you're not a portrait artist, Tim, are portraits to a large extent of black Americans. Could you talk a little bit about what that means to you, and did it have an influence on why you chose these subjects to work with, or why you chose this particular type of art form? Either of you.
Well, if you're talking about the difference, I think, between violin jazz and experimental art, when an artist is doing an experimental painting or whatever he's doing, he is really alone doing it. But usually when a jazz musician is playing jazz, he's with the rhythm section and what they call the front line of horn players. And the jazz musician never plans ahead as to what he's going to play, because then it's not jazz, then it's organized. So it's a creative. The best way I can explain jazz is you're on a high cliff, and let's say the band is playing some good jazz tune. There'll never be another you, or even All the Things You Are. That's a pretty good standard. So what you have to do is you have the chords to All the Things You Are to play. Mm-hmm. And they beat off the tempo, and you jump off that bridge, and you have to play that song before you land. So you don't have time to think of every note you're playing. It has to be subconscious, because they go by a mile a minute. So it's the daring feat of having a mind that is so cerebral that you can hear all the chord changes and still create your own jazz while you're doing that. Mm-hmm. And the minute you do it and you remember doing something really well, you want to save it for when you do it again, see? And then it plays a trick on you because you get so comfortable with knowing that if you're playing that song, oh, I know when I get to this part, I'm going to play this because it sounded good last time. Well, then you get stuck, and you're not really that creative unless you do something different all the time. That's why Charlie Parker was considered such a phenomenal bebop or jazz artist on alto saxophone, because he never played anything. Or I could mention many of them, John Coltrane, Sonny Rollins, it goes on and on. It has to be the most cerebral and deep art that there is in the world, in a way, because so few people can do it that are beyond what anybody else can even imagine. What their minds are going through in nanoseconds. They're playing a whole series of thousands of notes on one song, built on the chords of those songs, and then they experiment. Every time they play it, it's different. Mm-hmm. And the other thing is, I could be ready to play a chorus, not knowing exactly when it's my turn, there it goes, and you don't think ahead because you're hearing other notes played by somebody else. So it's then that you have to do it. But when, like, sometimes what we call little ensemble things where two people are playing together, it's like a counterpoint. Mm-hmm. So that becomes another, almost like a game, because you think you're going to play something, but because he played something, that gives you an idea of what you're going to play. It's like atoms bouncing, and each atom that bounces bumps into something else and makes you do something different. So it's that creativity between players that makes jazz such a cerebral and great art. And a lot of people can appreciate it, but nobody can appreciate it like the inner sanctum of the people themselves that are playing it. You know, it is that deep an art. Mm-hmm. And some of it is not maybe melodic necessarily, but that's what jazz is. And sometimes you strike gold, and sometimes it doesn't come off, but you're true to your cause, and you try to create.
It sounds like we might have a question here. Do we have a question?
Yes, we do.
Okay, great.
Marie, we would like to have him speak a little bit more about just the history of maybe some famous jazz musicians from Chicago, and give us a little insight into the historical aspect of it. This is a history class from our perspective, so that's perhaps Bob Steuben's interest here.
Okay, all right, great.
And wait, one more thing. And also, we would like to hear another set before we would have to disconnect too, or another song, I mean.
Yeah, no problem, Lisa. That was the next question that I was going to ask you, Johnny, and maybe Tim could help interject too. In thinking about jazz, we think about like certain eras, like the jazz age of the 1920s, and I was pointing out to the students that we have an exhibition here on the 1920s. Are there some events in history that you can remember in Chicago that have a connection to jazz music?
Well, I do. I remember when I was still in high school, and I lied about my age because I was playing in nightclubs, and I would get on a streetcar and come, when I lived way out in Roseland on the south side, and Saturday nights in those days you used to play in some screwy little nightclub, and when you'd play until 3 in the morning, you know, and then you'd have to get on the streetcar with your violin. And I would get off the streetcar on the south side of Chicago and park my car in an alley. Oh, and sometimes if I'm driving, I mean, my first car I think I had in high school, and I would park it in an alley on the south side and take my violin, walk through the alley and go to some little jazz joint on the south side. And I can remember getting off at 35th and State and sitting in with Albert Ammons at Club de Lisa. A lot of people say Delisa, but Club de Lisa, 35th and State. And because they saw this young kid on the violin, they would let me sit in. And after Saturday night, the sun would be up, and they'd have what they call the Milkman's Matinee. And they'd have dancing girls, just like the Cotton Club in New York. But at 5 in the morning, when the sun is up, at 35th and Halsted, and I would sit in with Albert Ammons and trying to learn to play jazz, and they would accept me because they saw I was a young kid starting out, and that was my first touches with jazz when I was still in high school.
I have a question to ask you. You said something really interesting to me, that you were a young kid in high school, and that's why they accepted you. Do you think that kind of, I guess it's sort of an informal apprenticeship, does that still go on today between musicians in Chicago or anywhere?
Well, it's changed so much. Then you didn't have TV, and you didn't have a lot of little nightclub joints that you're allowed to go into now.
Mm-hmm.
Now there's all these. You're not allowed to go in before you're 16. You're not allowed to drink. You're not allowed to do anything. Then it was sort of a loose, early Chicago days. Still prohibition before that. And it's a little different now. And now you either study, or better yet, now they have jazz in high school. They have great jazz orchestras.
Mm-hmm.
And they teach them all the great, they teach them all about the great jazz musicians. And when I was in school, they had none of that. It's just really stupid. I was so stupid when I was not well when I was young. And in Scanlon School in Chicago on the South Side, when I was like 7 years old, they had a thing called the Fresh Air Room. And the Board of Education was so stupid at that time, seriously, that they would make us put on hoods and coats. We looked like Druid monks. And we would walk through the alleys, through the halls, and everybody would make fun of us because we had these Druid monk outfits on because we were undernourished. And when everybody went out to recess, we had to open the windows and lie on a cot and watch everybody play while we drank warm milk out of a carton. And I thought that was so wrong at those times. Now the schools are smart and they know what they're doing. But then they didn't know.
And this was in a Chicago public school in the 19...
Yeah, outside of Chicago.
In 19... What was the year?
Well, it would be 1922. So, right. 1922, I was like 7 years old. And
Maria?
Yes.
We would be interested to hear some more about other famous musicians, Chicago musicians that he's worked with, because that is what we're studying. We're very interested in his first-person experiences.
Okay.
Well, Albert Ammons was a piano player, and I don't know if it's his son or grandson, was Gene Ammons, who became a great jazz tenor player from Chicago. But we did have Louis Armstrong, who didn't actually start here, but he played here in his early years, Louis Armstrong. So, of course, we have to say Louis now, but Louis Armstrong. And he was great. But there was a jazz violinist, the very first one I ever heard, which was Stuff Smith. He was probably one of the first jazz violinists. And Eddie South, right at Division and State. There's a building there that's been defunct for many, many years, but that was called the Airliner. And I used to go there and practice with Eddie South. And then there was Bud Freeman that had the gang with Benny Goodman, who was a Chicagoan who lived at the Hull House. Benny Goodman lived at the Hull House. And he was one of the early musicians that played in Chicago.
Are all of you at Von Steuben, are you all familiar with Hull House? Yeah. Okay, so you've done some study with that. That's great. I want to put something up on our document camera, and this might give you a little bit of an idea of the kind of world that Johnny came from. This is a photograph of Johnny, one of his CD covers. When you were how old, Johnny?
3.
He was 3 years old. And you can see the style of dress.
That was a Buster Brown haircut.
A Buster Brown haircut. And so I want you to try and imagine how Johnny's talking about, and what year is this about, Johnny?
I don't know, but before I forget, do they like my hair that way or the way I look now? My hair.
Either way. We have a question on this side. One of our students has a question for you.
Oh, great.
Okay, go ahead.
We like the tie.
Ask the question about what's that about?
What's the tie about?
What's the what about?
Oh, the tie in the photograph?
I want to know what the tie drive on.
The time of that?
Oh, the time?
No, the tie.
No, the tie, they're
Oh.
wondering about how they dressed kids in those days, kind of the fashion statement
Well,
at the
you know,
time.
you didn't go that way to school, but on Sundays you dressed that way to go to the movies or to church. And I used to also play in the Catholic Church, St. Anthony's, with an organist. And that was my Sundays.
I have a question to ask the class. In thinking about jazz music, what are some of the musicians that you know about and that you'd like to ask Mr. Frigo about? Because we're going to talk about Billie Holiday in a minute, but do you have anybody that you'd like to hear about?
Nat King Cole.
Nat King Cole?
Yeah, I played with Nat King Cole.
Yeah.
I sat in with. And who else?
Okay, we can't, could you speak up just a tiny bit? We can't quite hear you.
Earl Hines, they're asking about.
Earl Hines, yes. I also played with Earl Hines. He was a Chicago pianist, and he was one of the first jazz Chicago pianists, too. And I used to play at the Regal Theater on the South Side with Jay Burkhart's band. And we had a lot of good black musicians that played with him. Another good black musician was a singer who recently died, Joe Williams, who was a Chicagoan. And I got very friendly with him because he sang a song I wrote called Detour Ahead. And Earl Hines, I actually, in his latest years, played at the Regency Hotel here in Water Tower. There's a Ritz-Carlton, I take it back.
Okay.
It's Ritz-Carlton.
I wanted to ask you, Johnny, if you could, you mentioned Detour Ahead, which is a song you wrote for Billie Holiday in 1947.
I didn't write it for her. She heard us play
Okay.
it. No, she heard us play it, and she liked it, and she was the first one that recorded it.
I was wondering, would you mind singing some of that or playing some of that for us?
Well, I don't have the spray for my throat. No. This is a song that I got the idea of because I was going with a young lady that I was infatuated with, and I was wondering why she would even maybe be interested in me when there were also many handsome kids around. So I thought maybe there might be something wrong with my pursuing this. So I had this idea of a song called Detour Ahead. And I likened a love affair to a smooth road that had a detour. So you're traveling on the smooth road and you're going farther and farther and find out you're ramming into a detour. And I imagined likened that to a bad love affair. So the song, if you don't mind my less than adequate singing, the chords are very beautiful on it because now, after 47 years, it is the most requested jazz ballad in the jazz repertoire. So, and it goes something like this. I'll just play a little introduction later. The smooth road, clear day, but why am I the only one traveling this way? How strange the road to love should be so easy. Can there be a detour ahead? Wake up, slow down, before you crash and break your heart, gullible clown. You fool, you're headed in the wrong direction. Can't you see the detour ahead? The farther you travel, the harder to unravel the web. She spins around you. Turn back while there's time. Can't you see the danger sign? Soft shoulders surround you. Smooth road, clear night. Oh, lucky me that suddenly I saw the light. I'm turning back away from all that trouble. Smooth road, no detour, no detour ahead.
For those of you over at Von Steuben High School, do you have any more questions for Johnny? I know that we're kind of getting close to the end of your time with us, and then we're going to spend the rest of the time with the Kenosha School, so you have plenty of time to have some questions with both Tim and Johnny. So over at Von Steuben, do you have anything you'd like to add or ask?
I think he said he knew Bud Freeman. Could you tell us a little bit more about that?
About what?
Bud Freeman?
Yeah, Bud Freeman was a very good tenor man who played in a group with Benny Goodman and a lot of people from, was it Senn High School? I think it was Senn High School.
Austin.
No, Austin High School gang. The Austin High School gang. They were one of the really early jazz groups that came from Chicago School. Bud Freeman, Benny Goodman played in that group, and trombone player. Kids, when you get to be, I'm going to be 85 next week and a half, and every once in a while I drop a couple of gray cells, and those names don't pop into my head. But I never forget where my fingers go. That's the main thing. And,
what about the McPartlins? Were they involved in the...
Yeah, Jimmy McPartlin, right. And I also made some records with him. Jimmy McPartlin was a very fine trumpet player, and his wife was the great piano player who has that Sunday show, Marion McPartlin. And I was on her show in New York, by the way.
And Marion McPartlin is actually on WBEZ
Yes.
radio here in Chicago every, I think, Sunday night at 11 o'clock, and that's what...
Jazz.
Yeah.
And I did one of those programs with her.
Yeah. So Johnny, he's performed there.
Marie?
Yeah. Yes.
I think we're at a little natural break there that our bell's going to ring in about 3 minutes, but we want to thank them. I'm going to stay connected and watch, but the kids are going to leave, and we do want to say thank you to both of the artists.
Thank you.
Thank you. Happy birthday.
Happy birthday.
Oh, thanks.
No problem.
Happy birthday to you.
What I'd like to do now is think about a little more about the connection between as Von Steuben students are living between art and the visual art and the auditory art. Tim, could you pick up the painting that you've done of Johnny so that everybody gets a chance to take a look at this?
Well, this is good. Are they still there?
Yeah, they're still there. They're leaving, but they're still there, so everybody can get a chance to see this. And those of you who are in Kenosha schools, I'm going to zoom the camera in so you can take a look at this. And
It's backwards now. It wasn't backwards before.
I
no,
think we
that's
did it the
correct.
other way. I think we're okay.
Oh, here it is, yeah.
All righty. So for those of you in Kenosha, I'm going to ask Tim to talk a little bit now while Johnny's on the screen with his own painting. Tim, we know what inspired you to do this. Could you tell us a little bit about the story behind this painting, though?
Well, I had actually, one of the reasons I had pursued the jazz scene was actually about 12 years ago, I believe it was. There was an artist here at the Historical Society, Archibald Motley Jr., and he had a show here. He was a very important black artist, and his son had a jazz group that was playing for the show, and I thought it was so fine. So whenever I had my shows, I always had jazz musicians play, and I knew Johnny for about 10 years, and when I had my shows, I asked him to play for me, and he's graciously played for me for a few shows, and I always loved Johnny as a friend, and I wanted to do a portrait of him eventually, and that's how this came to materialize.
We're going to get really close, Johnny, and I don't mean to offend you by kind of putting the emphasis on the painting here for a moment. But Tim, looking at this painting, you've got a violin, and the violin is the brushwork is very smooth and even-handed. But the picture of Johnny, you've got it like really energetic brush strokes. Very, very, I mean, it looks like the paint is applied very thickly, and the brush strokes are done in a very, very fast, sort of almost staccato type way. Tell us why you did that.
Well, in fact, the first time Johnny saw this painting, this was hung down at Toulouse, a place where Johnny used to play, which was a restaurant and a lounge. He told me, "How come you painted the violin so pretty? You made the violin prettier than myself." And I told him, "Well, actually, he said, do you love the violin more than me?" I said, actually, I do. My grandfather played the violin, and he was my favorite person ever, and I always associated him with the violin. And then I played the violin for a few years in elementary school, and always loved the wood of the violin and the craftsmanship. And I always thought the violin was such a beautiful work of art itself, even if it had never been played. It's such a great sculpture to me. And I'm a purist when it comes to wood, and I thought, it's so smooth. So I thought that's why I really took a lot of time to really do the detail on the violin. Was I had been so familiar with it, you know.
And Tim, you were a furniture restorer, right? You restored antiques, is that correct? So that kind of is reflected in this work as well.
Yes. I restored after the Chicago fire. I restored some of the houses that were plastered, that they canvassed over, and some of the Frank Lloyd Wright's chandeliers in his houses.
My nose itches.
I have a question to ask. I really want to address some of you out there that have come on just recently in the past half an hour. We have Carthage College out there. Is that correct?
Hi, Marie. We're over here at Carthage College. We've got about 65 students split into two different rooms, and these are actually middle school students. So you can see one of them here in front of me. You're probably also looking at Indian Trail, and we've got a group of high school students. So you guys at Indian Trail, you should be able to wave now too. Looks like we've got about 35 students over there too.
Terrific. And do we have students? Are you all music students? I was told you were in music somehow. Is that correct?
About 2/3 of the group is saying yes, and 1/3 is saying no.
Okay. Well, for those of you who are musicians, I want you to think about some things that you might want to bring up. I was told that you were in music classes. I'm going to show two more paintings, a few more paintings of Tim's actually, and then we're going to go back to asking Johnny to maybe interpret something for us. Okay, I'm going to pop one up on the camera here. Tim? Okay, we have another portrait, and could you tell us a little bit about this piece?
Yes, this is the same girl in a few of the paintings you've shown. As she grew and went through her years, I wanted her painted at different times. And this is actually the same chair I painted her before, for anyone who had seen it with her reading a book and a profile type painting before. She really loved Michael Jordan, so I talked her into sitting for me for a Michael Jordan ticket, and she sat for me for a couple hours. It's just a scene that I set up. I'm more drawn to the antique and history days than I am of modern. I think, things that are made today could even be a chair. It looks to me, it looks too plain, and whereas a chair like this one here it's such a work of art. And my mother was an upholsterer, so I find I like the detail of the Gilded Age. And
Tim, I have to ask you a question. Is this the same chair we're looking at?
Yes, same chair.
It's interesting because this furniture figure there's such a connection between what you did as a refinisher and then what you've done as a fine artist. And I think that that's something that we have to keep in mind when we're studying in school. All the things that you do in school have an effect on what you'll do later on in your life. Now, I want to take a look at one more painting here, or two more. Let's take a look at two more. Okay. This is one of my favorites, Tim. Tell us a little bit about this one.
Well, this was a friend of mine. I had restored his house, and he was from the south side of Chicago, near a little bit west of Hyde Park, and I went through some of his photos, and these were his daughters, and thought it was just such a beautiful photo. I really wanted to turn it into a painting. Edgar Degas painted oftentimes from photos. He would take his own photos and then paint them. And I've always, in black and white photos, oftentimes they trigger a painting out of me. I love because if it's black and white for myself, I can kind of come up with my own colors, but still kind of be inspired by a composition. And that was the case here. I like the interaction between the two. You could read into it anything you wanted. The viewer could their imagination could be so individual and personal.
I have a question for Johnny now, based on what Tim just said about what you're reading into music. Do you have something that you prefer to have? I mean, when you play a song, do you have something you want someone to get out of this song, or are you playing it to the audience? Are you playing it for yourself? You talked about in jazz music that it really has to come from inside of you. So how do you do that? What's in your mind?
I'll tell you. When if I'm just playing fast tunes, fast jazz, I'd like there to be a middle-aged group enough so they're old enough to have at least remembered jazz and not grew up with just rock and roll and punk and rap, so I could relate to them more. But as far as women are concerned, I have a rapport with older women when I play that maybe doesn't relate to these people that are watching this program right now, but because the women who are not nobody's my age, but they have lived through the same youth that I have, where all their songs came from another era, from the 30s and the 40s. Those were the greatest songs that had the greatest lyrics. Some have become good songs that were written in the 60s and 70s. The Beatles had a couple of good songs. But the great songs were by Cole Porter, Duke Ellington, Jerome Kern, Irving Berlin, and about 5 or 6 others. If it wasn't for those 9 composers, this would be a different world now. Mm-hmm. Because now you still, when everything else changes. But if you go to a supper club, cabaret, they call it, cabaret. Those singers, whether they're 22 years old like Jane Monheit, or whether they're 80 years old, they're singing those great songs to a very individual, close audience that is in this little club. And they're singing those songs that gut-wrench you with their beauty and their lyrics and songs. So when I remember playing for a senior citizens group of women at Temple Sholem, I think it was. Mm-hmm. And it was a program, love songs played on the violin. That was the name of the program. And I saw all these women there that were in this senior citizens home. And I started playing. And it's the first time in my life that as I was playing these songs, instead of just thinking the music, I was thinking of the lyrics of these songs. Especially in the song from Gigi when Maurice Chevalier says, I remember it well. That song got to me so much, and I knew that these women were remembering their youth. And it got to me so much that I actually had a teardrop that fell on my violin when I played that one song. It never happened before. You're not supposed to do that. Like, actresses are not supposed to really cry. But it got to me at that point because I saw these women transformed because as I was playing, they were remembering the lyrics to that song, which was their youth.
You bring up a point about music and memory and emotion that I kind of would like to go into a little bit more. When you are, and lyrics too, I was under the impression with jazz that jazz musicians, first of all, didn't really think too much about lyrics when they're playing. It's all just the music.
That's true. It's very cerebral, and bebop is very, you could almost call it mathematical. You know, it's just full of all intricate extensions of the chord. Here's the basic chord, you know. But when you bebop, it's like a trumpet. A trumpet goes da 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 da. It doesn't have the valves. But the higher you go, you'll find other notes. So you can, if you play real high on a trumpet, you can almost play da 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 da. So that's what happens to jazz. They're finding these new notes way up here, and mixing them with these chords that make it more cerebral. And what was the question? The way you?
I went off. I asked you actually two questions about the lyrics. So you don't typically think of lyrics then when you're thinking of the music.
So when you play those, there's a song, "It's All Right with Me." If you listen to the lyrics and do it as a ballad, it's just a beautiful ballad. But then if you like the chords, you can ignore the lyrics entirely and play it up tempo because you like the chords of that song, and you're going on those particular chords.
Could you give us an example?
The title of the song, except that you have to give it a name.
Could you give us an example? Maybe you could play that for us.
Oh, I picked the wrong song now because I probably don't even remember. But it's about if the people happen to see Can. Frank Sinatra is very blue because he's in love with Shirley MacLaine, and the dancer comes down, Juliet Proust, and she wants to go out for coffee or something, and he likes her, but it isn't Shirley MacLaine. So he's saying it's the wrong song at the wrong time. It's a good song, but it's not her song, you know. But it's all right with me. But when we do it as a jazz tune, you go. Like that. You're listening to those songs. So forget the words, forget what it even means. You like the chords to that song, so it's another ball game.
It's on when you made that change, and I really want to throw this question out too to the students out at Carthage College, both of the groups, the middle school and high school group. You notice the difference in the tempo of the songs, and I want you to think about that. And how many of you are jazz musicians out there? Anyone?
Go ahead and raise your hands, guys.
I see one hand out there.
Okay. So for those of you who are jazz musicians, or the one person that's a jazz musician, if both of those pieces are considered jazz pieces, which one do you prefer and why? Have I put you on the spot here?
Can't hear them.
Well, okay, we're having a little trouble hearing you.
Let's try that again.
Which one did you guys prefer? The first one that was mellow and subdued, or the second one?
Second one.
Okay, why is that?
Because it's better. It sounds better. I like the beat. It sounds better.
Okay. Okay.
Disadvantage because I have no rhythm section to give me a boost here. But
Do you think that everyone who was let's put ourselves back in like the 1920s or 30s. Do you think that people your age would have had the same response then?
No.
Oh, why not?
Yes.
Yeah, okay, wait a second. We got yes and no's. The people who said no, why do you think not? Do you think people Johnny can answer this question because he was there. So he could tell us if young people in the 1930s would like the slow version or the fast version. So let's throw this back to him.
on the other hand, I'm playing without chords, and Cole Porter, his songs don't sound that good without chords, because he was not so much a melody writer as he could have songs that just laid on a couple of notes that don't mean anything unless you hear his chords. And this is one of those chords when in other words, that doesn't mean too much, but when the chord's on a you hear all those passing notes. That makes it beautiful, but I can't do that because I don't have a pianist or a guitar player for you to hear the fullness of what that song means.
And getting back to my question, though, Johnny, about the tempo and doing things that are up-tempo or slower, a lot of the students seem to think that that people in the 1930s, young people in the 30s or 40s, might have liked the slower version. Do you think that's true or not?
It is very true, very true.
Now,
The whole world was more like Ozzie and Harriet, and everything was neat and clean, and everybody did things very normally because they weren't influenced by movies and the freedoms that they're allowed now on TV. With just the pace, attention span is not the same anymore. Everything is quick sound bites, real fast, explosions. You go to see a movie, coming attractions, and all you're hearing are explosions and people running away from fire that's coming at you, And the kids need that energy because that's the era that they're brought up in, and they don't have the time to reflect and think of a simpler time in life, because life is not like that anymore.
You brought up something interesting about movies a couple times and movies influencing people, and we're all involved in movies and TV and video to a large extent. Right now we're on video. What kind of influences did you have in your work?
What do you mean, in movies?
Not in movies, just in general. Just we were influenced by movies, but what were you influenced by?
Well, I was interested in early radio when they had, the Ed Sullivan Show and Eddie Cantor Show and Sid Caesar, all the comedy shows on Sid Caesar's show. And now you only do that because it's like looking at going into an antique store and seeing how quaint it is. But then television was much, much more important then, because they didn't have anything taped. You were there live, and whatever faux pas you made, the world saw you do them. And now they're afraid everything is like a second late, so you can bleep a swear word, and if it doesn't come off, if there was a little shadow on your face that shouldn't have been there, you do it over again. So it's all sanitized to such a degree that you're just used to that placid perfection. Mm-hmm. It doesn't have the guts of the old. How about Orson Welles, when he did? People actually thought that the Martians landed on New York. People ran out and hid in the basement and everything else, because it was real and it was authentic and it wasn't sanitized.
I have a question to ask you, and I'm trying to recall if we've showed your CD cover to this group. I don't think we have. Just to give you sort of a framework of Johnny's life, I'm going to show you a cover of one of his CDs. And it's right under our camera here. And just excuse me for 1 second. And Johnny, how old are you when this photo was taken?
3 years old.
3 years old. And that was
You can
in,
see my long underwear. If you can raise it up, you can see on my legs see my underwear bumping out of my leg there?
right over
Yeah,
there.
and the other leg down there. So, anyway.
So this is the world that Johnny grew up in, and when thinking about music, we always have to think about the worlds that we grew up in and all the influences that we have when we're creating artwork. I want to go back just for a moment here to some of Tim's work, and in thinking about tempo, this particular piece makes me think about tempo a lot. And Tim, maybe you could tell us a little bit about how you came to do this piece, and if you had that thought in mind when you were doing this.
I love this one.
Yeah, this is one of my favorites.
Well, this painting, I was driving down Lawrence Avenue on a windy, rainy day, and a woman was holding her child, and they were leaning forward so much because the wind was blowing so hard, and to compensate, they had to lean forward. And I thought it would make a great painting. The scene kind of reminded me of something that some old French artist named Honoré Daumier had painted, or Van Gogh may have painted. And so I went home and I had this idea in my mind. Went on a camping trip, and the only thing I had around was cardboard. And I gathered up some paints and did this painting from my memory. But I started painting it as I saw it on the street, but then it just completely took a different direction, and all the things that I had, Charles Dickens stories and everything that I had read in the past kind of came into play. And it ended up being a peasant woman with a child in the candlelight at night, taking her child by the hand, done on cardboard.
Tim, you're bringing up a couple points about artwork. First of all, I want to ask you a question. You did this from memory, or you did this particular painting from a photograph, or was it something, and how long did it take you to do this?
This one was done from memory. It took me probably, maybe I would say 3 or 4 hours to do this painting.
Okay. And how long, when you saw the people, how long did it take for you to do this? So you saw them, and then it was locked in your memory for a while, and years, months,
Yeah,
weeks?
I saw them. I probably took in the image probably 20 seconds, but it was so dramatic, and by the time I had it in my mind, the idea, for probably a half a year, and then just the time came where I had gone on a little camping trip and had a little time where I was bored, and I started this, the memory came back to me, and I went at the painting.
So it was about a year between when you saw this and then when you painted it?
Yeah.
Okay.
Sometimes paintings are in my mind for 10 years,
Mm-hmm. That's interesting. Johnny, do you have that experience too with jazz, or is it all like right in the moment?
It's in the moment, but subconsciously it's there.
Mm-hmm.
You don't remember that Charlie Parker did a certain thing on a certain song, that. But the trouble is, when people are hearing, especially bebop, it's not an easy jazz form to understand, because the notes aren't as blatantly, played with just 4 notes in that chord. They're so bizarre and strange that it's a hard kind of jazz to listen to. But so naturally you lose. The only thing about bebop is they call it the head. When they actually, the song, if it doesn't have any lyrics, they just give it any goofy name,
Mm-hmm.
But they call that, if you play the head, it's called the head. That means you play the melody that before you start to play jazz, everybody's playing those same notes in unison, like.
Yeah, give us an example.
Now that's nothing but the blues, but it doesn't sound like the blues.
Mm-mm.
But those are blues chords called Billy's Bombs. It's hard to play here sitting down like this. But anyway, so they all play the head.
Mm-hmm.
So you know what the melody. Then everybody takes his choruses and improvises the way he pleases, and then you give him the signal, and then you're going to go next after the next jazz chorus. Everybody's going to play the head again, and then they always do this, and that means out. That's when you finish.
Oh, I see. Okay, so there's hand signals that go along with this as well.
And
Okay.
then to play a song, there's a guy way over there. You can't shout, so you go like that. That means two flats. See, it's key of B flat, B flat and E flat. So that's in the key of E flat, or if you say it's in the key of G, one sharp.
Did you play a lot of bebop, Johnny?
Not too much, no, because but when I play in jazz concerts and I'm playing bebop tunes, I learn the heads of the tunes, and then I play the blues. But I'm not crazy about playing the blues because you're restricted to those 4 chords.
Could you demonstrate what those 4 chords are just for us today?
Yeah, it's 4. Let's say you're playing in the key of C. It's 4 bars of C. Now you go to the F ninth. That's for 4 bars. Oh no, 2 bars, and then it's resolved to the tonic, which is the key of C, and then the 9th and 10th bar is a dominant back to C. It's 12 bars blues. So.
In thinking about the difference between bebop and different types of jazz,
Marie?
Yes.
Actually, we have about 10 minutes before we lose the students from Washington Middle School here who have come over, and I'm wondering if we can take a little time for them to ask some questions.
Oh, of course.
Actually, why don't we go over here? We've got these kids missed the very beginning of the program that you started out with on Steuben, and so I know they wanted to ask you a little bit about some of your background. Go ahead and press the button, guys.
Whose background?
I think your background, Johnny.
How long have you been playing the violin?
Well, to say how long I've been playing it doesn't really give you a fair idea of who I am, because I started when I was 7 years old until I was 11, 7 and a half until I was 11. And then when I got into junior high school, they had no orchestra. So I had to give up the violin and play whatever they had left. And the only instrument they had left was a tuba. So I was stuck with playing the tuba in junior high school, Curtis Junior High School. So then when I got into high school, I was starting to think of dance music and everything. So you can't play a tuba, you have to play a string bass. So I borrowed an old string bass from an old Italian friend I knew, and I started playing string bass in high school. And for the next half century, I made 95% of my living playing bass. I played all over the country with Jimmy Dorsey's band, short time with Tommy Dorsey. Then Chico Marx of the Marx Brothers. I don't even know if you people know about the Marx Brothers, but there was a little Italian guy called Chico Marx. He was Jewish, of course, but I mean, his name was Chico Marx, and he played the piano, and he used to roll grapefruit across the black keys, which made it a G-flat 6th chord, and he did all these little tricks. So between movies, he took a real good jazz band out on the road for a theater tour. So I played with the Chico Marx Orchestra on bass, and they hired a young singer from Hyde Park High School, and that was Mel Torme, famous singer who died a few years ago. And I sang in the quartet with Mel Torme and the Chico Marx Orchestra. So that's the way my life went, playing with different orchestras on bass. And every month or so, I'd take the fiddle out every 2 months to see if the strings were still on and just goof around. And then this is very interesting because I was a first call bass player in the studios for commercials. And I realized that for 35 years, I played on more radio and television commercials than any bass player in the world in those particular 35 years, because all the big advertising companies were here in Chicago. Leo Burnett, J. Walter Thompson, and those companies. So I played bass on all those commercials. But then when disco came along, and you had to do that, they call it popping on bass. You go, you had to do octaves, and you had to use your thumb. And I didn't have a callus on my thumb, so when I did this commercial, I realized I didn't do it well. So a little light went over my head, and I said, "Uh-oh, what am I trying to keep up with these young guys that are just learned electric bass and are playing, you know, like demons? They were so good." So that's when I gave up the bass and took an incognito job out at the airport, playing and strolling around tables with an accordion player from 4 days a week, from 7 to 10 in the morning. But I would never tell anybody in the studios that I was doing that, because it was demeaning in a way to be strolling around the tables after I already had this name for myself. So there was a violin player who lived near the airport. So whenever I had my early morning commercials to do, I would send a different violin player to play at the Regency Hotel Hyatt near the airport. So they never knew that I was playing there. And that's how I got to learn all this melody of all those songs that I knew backwards on bass. I knew all the bass lines to all those songs, but I didn't know the melody to all those because that wasn't my job, and I was just playing the bass notes. So that's where I learned to do all the melody notes, and I wanted to play them all correctly, not fake my way through them.
Do we have another question?
We have lots of questions. We don't have a lot of time. How about the other room here at Carthage? The other Washington students, would you unmute your mic?
Can you play us a song?
Okay, you're asking for a request, and I was hoping someone would do that. Could you be a little more specific, though? Okay, could I have a translator on that? Thank you. Okay, what is the song that's being requested here? Okay, we still can't quite hear you. Maybe we could have someone speak directly into the mic. I'm wondering if you all can pass the mic and have someone talk directly into it.
Okay. I'm as close as I can get. Can you hear me?
Yep.
Goodbye, pork pie hat.
Goodbye, pork pie hat.
Oh, you know what she's referring to? I don't know the head, but that's because pork pie was a famous hat that Lester Young, the great tenor player, played. And when he died, they probably said, "Goodbye, pork pie hat." Am I right?
Yes.
Yes. And I don't recall the actual head melody of that song. And you'd need the rhythm section anyway. And it's also the way he did it on tenor. He was a great tenor player because other people at that time tried to outshine him by playing more notes. But he was like a purist that didn't waste any notes. He played simpler, but they were all musically profound, and he was favorite player. He's a tenor jazz player with Count Basie's band for many years.
Maybe, do we have another request?
Maybe he could just play one of his favorite tunes.
Ooh.
No, how about see, when you know favorite tunes, it's what they did with the song. It's not just the melody itself, because anybody could play the melody to Body and Soul, to Pork Pie Hat. I mean, it's
How
not.
about Osaki Saki?
Huh?
Like that. Osaki Saki or something.
Well, that's too complicated. But if you know about Lester Young, you also probably know about the I'll just do a half of it. Yeah, that was about. Thanks, kids. Thanks.
Okay, it looks
Johnny,
like we just.
Yes.
we want
more
to just say
minutes?
thank you real quick. We're going to lose the students here at Washington. We're going to let them out, and we're going to keep the kids at Indian Trail on a little bit, the high school kids, because I know they haven't gotten a chance to ask a question.
Okay,
So we're going to
good.
say goodbye to both of the rooms here at Washington and Indian Trail. We're going to give you guys about 10 more minutes with Johnny and Tim, okay?
And the kids asked very good questions, too. The few that they asked were very good.
Okay. All right, well, thank you so
Somebody
much.
has to go to the bathroom. She's waving her hand. Oh, excuse me.
Okay. Could we have those high school students that have questions? You want to just go right ahead and start asking? Great, okay.
This question is for the artist, Mr. Schools. Yeah, that's right. We have some people here that, wonder what kind of materials you use. We have people here that wonder what kind of materials you use, whether it be oil, acrylic paint, or, what inspires you for the paintings you do and, to make them look like they do.
I'm known as a pluralist, which means that I could take anything and make a work of art. I do really love oil paints, but because one of the reasons is because it's a forgiving paint where takes a long time to dry. So I could start a painting today, and I could just put my brushes in the paint and just leave them dipped in the paint itself, submersed in it, and then come back tomorrow and pick up right where I left off, and the paint on the canvas or the material I'm painting on would still be wet. I could still mix in the colors. Whereas acrylic paint I also like, but acrylic would dry within an hour or so. But also at times I like paint with acrylics because, I do want something to dry quickly. And then, but for instance, I found about 7 years ago, I found a flag on a road that had been run over and was all distressed and beat up and bleached from the sun. And I always wanted to make a work of art out of it. And then this September 11th, New York, triggered me to do the work of art out of it, where I put it inside of a box and put a fan on it, and so the flag blew. And so it was kind of a work of art that was like a sculpture in a way, so that had a patriotic feel for me, because the flag, even though it was all beat up, it still was waving. Old glory in a manner of speaking. But I can take anything. I designed a pair of boots with some people on Oak Street in Chicago, and they were some of the finest shoemakers in the world. Their stuff's in the Field Museum for a 40-year exhibit, and I designed a pair of boots, co-designed a pair of boots with them that, Steven Tyler from Aerosmith bought a pair off of me. So I don't really have any. I could go any way with art. I haven't even found where I'm going to go with art. I know I'm going to evolve in so many ways still.
Tim, I have a question for you. I'm going to put something up on the document camera to help illustrate that. This is a painting that you did of a young man from a photograph, but you also carved the frame. Is that correct?
Yes.
So that's another example of the kind of work that Tim does. It looks like the frame the carving on the frame imitates the leaves there in the painting. Was that your intention?
Yes, and see, you can do anything you want when it comes to artwork. This painting, I had learned so many things in the past, of my family. They were really inventive, and a lot of times, for instance, say if you have just the primary colors, red, yellow, and blue, well, if you only have those colors, then you have to mix them to make the secondary colors, the green and the orange and the purple or the violet. So in other words, by only having 3 colors, you have to experiment a little bit, and sometimes that's a really beautiful direction to go in. You know, when you don't have, I at the time didn't really have the money to afford frames, so I made my own frames. You know, carved my own frames, and kind of the need drove me to create.
Well, you bring up another subject about doing some artwork just to, I mean, some artists talk about doing artwork to just create something and express themselves, and then there's other things that you do, and Johnny was talking about strolling around doing art to make money, and up on the document camera I've got something that you did a while back ago, and it's pretty popular here in Chicago. Tell us a little bit about this.
Yeah, this.
I thought that was Elton John for a second.
The man that gave me, there's a man that really loved these cows, a wealthy man in Arlington Heights, and he wanted one of these cows really bad, and I was able to get a hold of one from Zurich, Switzerland, and we had it sent over here for the Chicago Cows exhibit. And
excuse me, Tim, I just want to interject. Do you students over at Carthage College, do you know about the cows in Chicago? Have you all seen those? A couple summers ago, we had cows all over the place. No? Yeah? Okay, it looks like they, no other terminals connected. Let's see, we may be off. They may have cut us off. Okay, I think they cut us off. We'll see if they come back online. They were supposed to cut off at 2 o'clock. That was the idea, and I was wondering why they said they were going to stay an extra 10 minutes. But I don't have controls over what they do. So I was hoping I wanted to end with your Try a Little Tenderness, because I thought that was so nicely done, but we'll see if they come back on. We may be done. Oh, about the cow? Yeah. Tell us about the cow, Tim.
Cow.
Hi, gang.
There's a little audience back here.
Yeah.
No, I had the cow. I had this. I really myself wasn't really too. It wasn't my cup of tea, really, the cows. But I was a real wealthy man that really was flipping over these cows. He's a businessman, so he's always thinking everything's going to make a lot of money. And so he gave me a brand new car for the cow. I got a brand new car. And so, but what I did was I took a Mona Lisa picture and had it enlarged by some printers as big as this wall, as high as this wall. And I actually took the eyes from the Mona Lisa print and plastered the eyes on the cow so they were flat, and then put those on, and then matched the face to the texture and the likeness of the print, and had some guy on Oak Street
I don't have to go to work until
tailor the clothes
1:30.
like the Mona Lisa.
No,
It cost me a couple $1,000 for the clothes, you know, and I took a wig. I took 8 wigs and turned it into one. It only took me like 6 hours to do.
The entire thing?
Yeah, because I didn't do, really, all I did was paint the face and the hooks and left the rest blank. And then some guy on Oak Street